Thanks, Kelly. Thanks very much. Hello, and thanks for everybody coming along today. You're joining our panel discussion, Real Time to Retail, Building a Bridge. So I'm Kate Frankish, and I'm the Director of Strategy at Pay.uk. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Genevieve Marchbanks from the PSR, Maha Eldamachki from Pay.uk, Charlotte Jordan from American Express, and Galia Carroll, who's an expert in economics, open banking, and consumer choice. Our panel will introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their perspectives on this topic in a minute. But first of all, I just want to kick off with some thoughts on why we're having this discussion today. So if I look at what's happening in the payments market, so 50% of all UK payments in 2019 were made over the card rails. And that's 98% of UK consumers who have access to a debit card and 68% of UK consumers who have access to a credit card. So it's a massive payment vehicle that's widely used by consumers. Faster Payments, which is our real-time payment rail, grew 24% in 2019, with nearly 2.5 billion transactions running through the infrastructure. These transactions were mostly for person-to-person payments, so that's you paying a friend or paying somebody a bill. And businesses use faster payments a lot. In fact, 4 in 10 business-to-business payments in 2019 were made using faster payments. But where there's a real gap is consumers paying businesses, so retail type payments are not necessarily showing masses of volume through the faster payments rail. So what could be the barriers to adoption? I think that's part of what we want to touch on today in the panel. And if you think about how successful propositions land, they normally provide clear advantages to both sides of the transaction. And they get to a point where there's a use case which really stands out. I think the one that's used often in payments is contactless cards and TFL, which is where the volume of contactless payments really took off because it was really easy for consumers to use. It was a great journey. But with account-to-account type transactions using faster payments, adoption is arguably marginal. So despite high technology adoption and an active faster payment scheme, we're yet to see the system influencers step in and really push for this. We have had several attempts at this, companies like MasterCard and Amex, with intentions to actually push the agenda for faster payments in a retail environment. And we'll find out more about the Amex proposition shortly. One of the challenges around using faster payments in a retail environment is consumer protection. Because if you think about it, if you make a card payment, you have protection on that payment. And generally, with a faster payment, you have retailer protection, but no additional protection in place. So we in Pay.uk, along with the PSR and UK Finance and industry experts, have been looking at the role of consumer protection, whether or not that is a barrier to entry for this proposition really taking off. In fact, we published the Consumer Protection Summary paper on the 5th of November, and if you want to see more about that, go and have a look on the Pay.uk website. The key findings of that research, which was based on secondary research, was really that in countries where faster payments is used in high volumes, for retail payments, countries like Netherlands, Singapore, and Australia, there hasn't been any overall consumer protection policy or process put in place in these countries. And in fact, generally, the retailer protection is what's used and fall back on from a customer perspective. But what we have found looking at the data and statistics that are out there is that there's no actual real consumer-based research. It's all based on hypothesis and industry expertise. So the next phase of this work is for us to actually do that, and the consumer protection research is actually actively underway at the moment. So watch this space, and we'll be publishing the findings from that shortly. And I suppose while some would see real-time in a retail environment as a threat to card revenues, there's now a clear case for the UK to own a dynamic, efficient and resilient interbank payments network, which offers enhanced payment opportunities in the retail space and gives consumers choice, which is what we all want to do. I think there's also one of the benefits that's really key, and we'll get into that in the panel discussion, is that competitive forces could drive card costs down, which is good for the market. I think consumer choice is also really important, and Galina will definitely touch on that point. We've had a couple of discussions in this space up until now. And there's new entrants coming into the market like Apple, Google, and Libra. And real time for retail is a fundamental part of the business case for the new payments architecture. And it's aligned with the regulator's strategic intent. It's important that we deliver something which will give further consumer choice and great payments experience going forward. So faster real-time payments offer greater scope to enable the Internet of Things, and the links between data and payments will help to make payments better. We're yet to see a killer use case for this, and I think that's what we're going to touch on today. But today's panel will discuss how their organisations are at the forefront of the conversation. So that's a little bit from me, a little bit of background. What I want to do now is move over and introduce the panelists. They'll do an introduction of their own, and then we'll get into some questions. So Genevieve, moving over to you. Would you like to do your introduction, please?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Kate. And hello, everybody. I am the head of policy at the PSR, and it's an absolute pleasure to join you today. So I thought I'd briefly address in my opening remarks the PSR's ongoing focus on end users from its inception to now. So in 2015, we had an exciting but demanding challenge to shake up the payments industry and make it work better for everybody. And we've successfully opened access to payment systems, introducing greater competition and stimulating innovation. These have led to the creation of a new payment systems operator introducing, greater competition and stimulating innovation. We're starting to see a real difference in the fight against payment scams. And since the introduction of the interchange fee regulation, also in 2015, we as the main UK competent authority have undertaken monitoring and enforcement to ensure compliance with the regulation. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. I'm hoping we can touch a little bit on access, about how it's vital to competitive and innovative payments, and they will remain a priority for the PSR. We've also seen new indirect access providers enter the market and provide real alternatives as a result of our work. So we're now developing our future strategy, and I know a number of you have input to our consultation so far. And our strategy, we hope, will ultimately require us to make choices on how to prioritise our work. Overall, though, we want payment systems to remain accessible, reliable, secure, and value for money in the most efficient way. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks very much, Genevieve. So I'll move over now to Galina for your introduction, please.
Hey, thanks, Kate. So my name's Galina Carroll. I'm an independent regulatory economist and a member of the Consumer Forum at Open Banking. I'm interested in the benefits that technology can bring to consumers, but also to the process of regulation itself. I work with regulators, regulated financial services firms, and fintechs on this. I've written 2 papers for the Current Account Switch service on the opportunities and challenges from open banking and faster payments. I've also acted as the product owner for the Bank of England on its key supervisory system that oversees banks, insurance firms, and of course payment systems. I believe that there is a significant potential for faster payments and open banking to enhance choice and competition in the market. And as a result of that, to provide additional choice to consumers. The key question is how much? And that's very hard to say because numbers are hard to come by. But for example, I would refer to a report by Faith Reynolds and Mark Chidley, who are the consumer representatives for open banking. And they wrote an excellent report last year about consumer priorities for open banking. And there they estimated that the potential benefits from faster payments and open banking could be up to £12 billion in a year. This was based on personas from the FCA Financial Lives survey and has a lot of rigor in it. As you've mentioned earlier, and as Genevieve has also mentioned, there's a key challenge in terms of realizing these potential benefits, and that's securing the right protections framework for consumers in faster payments generally and in open banking specifically. I'd applaud the Pay UK work in this regard and would very much encourage people to read the November report. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing the analysis that comes out, the further analysis that comes out in this regard. And I'm basically looking forward to the discussion this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Galina. So moving over to Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm Charlotte Duerden. I'm the Country Manager and Managing Director of American Express here in the UK. So as you think about American Express, innovation to offer fast and frictionless payments is core to our DNA. We actually started 170 years ago with horse-drawn carriages moving strong boxes across the US. We launched, created travelers checks. We took credit cards to be global. And I think instant payments based on bank-to-bank transfer is just simply the next evolution of this. And I think they're really important to provide the opportunity to give consumers, businesses and merchants more choice. So we launched Pay with Bank Transfer in the UK. We chose to launch in the UK because we saw there's a commercial opportunity. But we also think that regulators have made it the best place in which to launch these innovations. And I'll pick up on a couple of things, maybe just the CMA and the OBIE have given UK the edge as we think about open banking. They've given TPPs consistency and certainty whilst keeping customer choice and consumer choice and promoting competition at the heart of everything we do. And I think it's things like these that will drive competition across the ecosystem. These payments are going to be fast and cheap, but they also take a lot of frictionless out, especially on mobile. They help merchants with abandonment rates, and they help reduce concerns on data privacy. I also think they're open to anyone with a bank account, and it avoids the kind of the chicken and egg problem that you have with new schemes that are trying to sign up merchants and consumers and get scale across both sides at the same time. I think they're a great alternative to debit, and they'll help reduce problems of dominance within the ecosystem. And as a company that is always a choice in every consumer and business's decision-making, we're always focused on value. That's why we've launched Pay with Bank Transfer here, and I'm really excited to be part of this panel and to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. And I would encourage you, if you've not already had a look at, to go on to Open Banking and have a look at what you can do with Amex Pay by Bank Transfer. Certainly is very innovative. So let me now move on finally to Maha, who's a colleague of mine in Pay.UK. So Maha, over to you.
Thanks very much, Kate. I'm Maha Eldamashki. I'm the Chief Payments Officer at Pay.UK. And having been at Pay.UK for about 4 months, and I came over from the FCA, and been in payments in different guises actually throughout the years. It's great to be on this panel to talk about the opportunities around faster payments. I mean, listening to the introductions of my fellow panelists has been really great in terms of all of the points that they had already made around the importance of what faster payments can do and what the role it plays. And in a world where payments is dynamic and it's constantly changing, to meet the needs of the market, I think it's important to think about, what are the propositions that exist out there and what role, faster payments can play. If we think of things like open banking, that's already been mentioned, PSD2 coming in, creating a brand new brand of payments firms in the PISPs, the payment initiation service providers, as well as the various emerging business models within payments, and the importance of people having choice in how they pay, and that flexibility of choice in times like these, during the pandemic. where there's a lot of movement towards digital. It's really important to ensure that faster payments can play an important role. And for me, in terms of Pay.UK, what is that role that the faster payments rail need to play? What can we do, working with the industry to ensure that we are allowing for those opportunities to come to fruition, and how can we collaborate with the industry to bring to the fore some of those collaborations and some of those propositions. So I'm looking forward to the panel, and I'm excited by what I'm going to hear from everybody, and I certainly look forward to the conversation after this panel is on.
Okay, thanks very much, Maha. Great to hear from you all. So let's move on to the kind of meat of the discussion for today. So first of all, I'm going to ask Charlotte, this is a question for you. It's great to hear about Amex and the pay by bank transfer proposition. Obviously, Amex recognise the opportunities in the open banking space. So what I'd like to ask you is, how's it going? Is the market what you thought it would be? And can you share any plans for future growth?
Thanks, Kate. So, I mean, as I said in my opening, we see great potential in this and a real challenger to debit. I don't know whether to believe the recent study that I saw that said by 2022, 64% of adults will adopt some form of open banking. But whether they will or they're not, we're really pleased with how Pay with Bank transfer has been going. We launched less than a year ago. We're supporting payments across the UK economy in retail, higher education and charity. Captain Tom's NHS fundraising efforts certainly tested our technology. And I'm really pleased that it came through with flying colours. And what I really loved about it is that you've got consumers choosing to donate, and they can see what's in their bank account, deciding therefore how much to donate, and really, I think, giving them visibility and confidence in that decision. So what I really think is that it's really critical to success for the future is that banks are incentivized to engage, that this should not be a box ticking exercise from a compliance point of view, and that there are incentives and economics to help them create premium APIs, because I think that will really help drive competition. I also think it's not a one-horse race, and we've seen lots of innovation and partnership between TPPs and established players. So I think as we think about PISPs, it is early days. I think it's going to take time. Kate, you mentioned TfL's contactless moment, and I don't know what the equivalent is for this, but I do believe down the track it will be ubiquitous. To get there, we need continued development, and it's critically important. So first on that, from my point of view, is refunds. They're critical for both merchants and consumers and giving them confidence. Recurring billing, I think, will be interesting. And then I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this technology moves from e-commerce to in-store and how we start working in the physical world. And I think that's really important. The other piece that I would add and just finish on is that it's not just a UK story. And so open banking will develop as consumers, merchants and businesses adopt it, and new innovations will come out. And I'm confident that our regulators, some of which are on the call here, will continue to make the UK a leader. But it is also important that we think about this as global, whether that's Europe with the retail payment strategy, or whether it's local projects happening across the world. The challenge for us in a global payments ecosystem is to make sure that we link them all up. And I think that's going to be really important as we think about the future and the potential.
Yeah, certainly, Charlotte, standards and ubiquity is so important to make payments flow. And if we're looking at the global picture, things like the ISO 20022 standard that we're looking at within the new payments architecture is certainly an enabler to allow wider flow of payments globally.
I'd agree.
Okay, great. So if I move on to Genevieve from a regulator's perspective, so having the ability to explore the real-time opportunity must be a key consideration for the PSR. So what kind of barriers does your work identify to the broader adoption? What have the PSR seen in their studies?
So we know from the history of payment systems in the UK that change doesn't have to be sudden and disruptive to be transformative. And we think that the work initiated by the CMA and open banking, as already mentioned, it still has a bit of a way to go. And we may see gradual shifts towards real-time interbank payments for retail use cases once the full roadmap is delivered. So we're thinking about barriers at present, but we should be clear and say that we don't pick winners, but rather we think it's important for people who rely on payment systems to have a choice and availability of services that work for them. So we're doing some work on consumer protection in this space to see if this might help build consumer and merchant confidence. And we think we know what the possibilities and opportunities of real time should be, such as quicker settlement times and renewed opportunities for different business models. Now, we're not sure it's certain that these will be delivered just by switching from one set of infrastructures to another, or whether business models and so costs might evolve. But as a regulator, we intend to keep an eye on how the market develops to see whether the benefits are being passed through to both consumers and merchants. And we know that the low interest rate environment and the economic outlook is also causing retail banks to look at their business models. So overall, I'd say it's an uncertain time on both sides of the fence. Not that we're being pessimistic.
Thanks very much, Genevieve. And you touched on there, the point of, is it led by new infrastructure or is it something that could be there today? And we know from the Amex and MasterCard use cases that there is some movement and some use of faster payments in the retail environment today. And that's one I wanted to go on to talk to Maha about. So obviously, a core part of the MPA development is looking at how do we make faster real-time payments, and then how do we look at enabling some of the ancillary services that would need to sit around the payment to make it attractive to merchants to use. But that's not to say that there's not more that we can do with faster payments today. And that was what I was going to ask you, Maha. One of the things that would be good for you to bring to life is how Pay.UK are considering our role in driving the activity of use of faster payments in a retail environment.
Yeah, I mean, we have a role to be a market catalyst, and the market and we have been talking a lot about the new payments architecture, the MPA, and what that will bring, and we're excited by those opportunities. But we also recognise that our participants, fintech firms out there, the market doesn't stand still. There is a lot of activity going on. I mentioned earlier the new branded payments firms that have come in, the KSPs, a lot of activity around open banking. And so the market is innovating and looking at, where are the gaps and how do we close these gaps? Our regulators are looking at, where are their market failures and how does the market close those gaps? Whether it's things like, digital inclusion, SME banking, and so on. And so, in many cases, our role coming in to actually support the market to close these gaps is really important. And one good example, actually, and I think, Kate, you were involved in that work, at the beginning of the pandemic, where HMRC needed to look for ways to actually make payments safely and securely in a really, quick, agile way in a short space of time, and we work with the industry to deliver that. And so, short term and long term, we have a role to play to ensure that the infrastructure is fit for purpose. I mean, innovation and creative ideas is going to drive economic growth, and it's important for us to make sure that all of those new ideas, those innovative, creative ideas coming to the fore, are supported by the right infrastructure to actually be deployed and be delivered. And so, there is a drive towards digital platforms. There is a recognition more and more that different types of payments are needed. And so what can we as Pay.UK, running the core infrastructure and as the systems operator, do to ensure that we are allowing for that innovation to happen, and we're not a blocker. And I think you mentioned the word enabler, Kate? How can we be one of those enablers? And I think that that role is really important. We're not going to necessarily be the ones actually, creating the proposition and driving it, but we need to enable it. And I think Genevieve also mentioned this point on accessibility, and that's also important, where you've got new types of payments firms in the being created, new ideas coming that is not kind of your traditional business model. Now, how can we make sure that we are supporting those ideas? And so I feel like we have a role to play in all of that, working closely with the industry to ensure that we've got the right platform.
Great. Thanks, Maha. So lots for us to do in Pay.UK, definitely. I think we all feel that. So really moving on to the consumer lens, and Galina, it'd be really good to hear from you a bit about what you see from a consumer perspective are the advantages of using a real-time payment in a retail environment, and where does the open banking functionality fit into the picture?
Thank you. I think there's three real advantages of using real-time payment functionality. If you think of the first use case where I can pay through to one of my other accounts in near real time, so that sets the baseline functionality for account sweeping in the future. So that's number one. The second one would be, Kate, you and I go out for a socially appropriately distanced coffee. I buy the coffee. You can, because we're going Dutch today, you can pay me in real time. And then obviously the third one is to pay companies for services in the more merchant real-time situations. So that obviously for this third use case, cards are pretty good at that. But for the first two, it's a bit trickier. So the flexibility that we get from this sort of functionality supported by open banking is really important to consumers. And furthermore, as we get this request to pay framework, which was launched earlier this year, we're going to get further flexibility as in terms of when consumers negotiate to make payments. As for people working in the gig economy or with uncertain timing of actual payments, it's very difficult for them sometimes to use direct debits in the same way that those of us who get a monthly wage can do so. So I'll be interested how the request to pay framework actually plays out in terms of product development and consumer adoption. But even for the other three use cases so far, we can see there's a real advantage to consumers from those. One of the things I would point out, though, that in order to realize the full advantages of those use cases that we've just talked about, I think there's two things that would really help. The first is balance visibility before making a payment, and the second is enhanced data security standards for faster payments. Now, the desire for enhanced visibility of balances before making a payment was highlighted by the Payment Strategy Forum back in 2015. And Open Banking Implementation Entity Research in 2018 actually reiterated the desire of consumers to have this functionality. They had about 58% of consumers would really like to see that functionality. Now, Charlotte's already pointed out that Amex delivers that, so pay by bank, but not all of the industry does this. And even those that do, it's not always done in a consistent fashion. So for consumers, it's tricky. And I think it would be really helpful to have a consistent visibility of balance before making payment in a consumer and guideline fashion, so that it's all consumers know what to expect regardless of the app that you're in. I think the second thing that would be super helpful for consumers would be to have consistency in standards of data security. Now, this is a huge topic, and I know we don't have time to go through all of this here. For people who are interested in it, I would very much direct them to the Consumer Forum, the Open Banking Consumer Reform Forum response to the Payment Landscape Review by HM Treasury. But the short answer is, I think it's important that whatever security and data security standards we have for cards, PCI DSS, we should have something equivalent for faster payments. And yet at the moment, we don't. And this is important for banks when they're trying to do fraud analysis of what the payments are being used for, but it's also important so that merchants don't have to have one standard for one set of payments and transaction types, cards, and another set for faster payments. So those have been my comments on the advantages to consumers, but also two issues that I think they would really need to have so that they can take advantage of faster payments.
Yeah, thanks, Galina. That's really clear, and I do think there are also advantages to merchants with using a faster payment or accepting a faster payment. Okay, so I'm going to move now back to Genevieve, and thinking about the competitive picture. How far do you, as the regulator, see the big players, which are called the cards and the clearing banks, as a force for good and part of the solution? And what can these entities do to embrace this opportunity?
So anyone who wants to work with us and with the wider sector to improve payments is a force for good. We hope that the sector understands that we want to work collaboratively to bring about useful, cost-effective services to those that need them. And we do think there are a number of initiatives that we've worked on that show that sometimes it is useful to have someone outside the industry who can work with all the parties to try to bring about better results. And actually, we'd encourage everyone to take us up on this. Tell us what needs coordinated work. Tell us as the regulator where we can help and work with us to make sure that all voices are heard. Now, competition in payments, as you know, can come in many forms, and the market today provides a relatively healthy variety of different ways for consumers to pay or initiate a payment. We do agree that more can be done for competition, and good competition leads to improved and more competitive pricing, innovation, and ultimately the best end user outcomes. In terms of big card players, like the payment systems who hold a large percentage of the retail payments volume, they certainly have a role to play in ensuring good competition. They provide the governance and some product development to the market for their global brands, and users of their services can then use these developments for their own propositions. So they certainly do have a role to play and act as a force for good. We expect nothing less of these payment systems than to support our objectives, which of course include good competition. And our card acquiring market review identified areas in the cards value chain where more can be done to support competition for all players. And we're now consulting on some of those proposed remedies and would welcome people's thoughts. So as the market evolves with things such as open banking, we've also seen these payment systems develop market solutions. And finally, additionally, we see a role for other payment systems like faster payments to also bring new competition to the market. And the development of the MPA, as Maha has mentioned, will see a more agile platform, definitely a force for good for the new payments market. And faster payments also supports payment initiation. So these new competitive developments, we think, are integral to the development of payment systems.
Great. Thanks very much, Genevieve. And that links quite nicely. Maha, I want to ask you a question now about what can Pay.UK, what can we do to help develop the collaboration that's needed with existing and new types of players? And what do we want the market to do? How would we like to direct the market?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we can do in our market catalyst role. I mean, if I think of request to pay, that requires different parties within the market to come together and actually deliver the solution. So the end-to-end solution can't be delivered by just one party. You need to have your financial institution, your biller, your repository provider, and so on. And so collaboration has always been actually a feature of the payments world. There's always been a need for everybody within payments to collaborate, and it's no different, I suppose, for us. I mean, we want to be able to hear from all of you, various participants in the market. What do you think are some of the challenges that you have that we might be able to fix if it's a quick win, and we're able to work with you on? helping you deliver the solutions that you want to deliver, you know, in the market. And so if we can actually be helpful in that way, then we are open to having that conversation. We're always happy to hear from you. If there is a need for a number of participants to come together, or a number of different parties to come together, and it obviously relates to, you know, the various schemes and the managed services that we operate, then we'd be also happy to kind of, you know, bring everyone together around the table and have that conversation. And again, if there's anything that we can do to support the propositions, the ideas that the various parties are bringing to the table, I think there's a lot of opportunity where, you know, if there's propositions with open banking, not just the PISP solution, but the AISP solution, the account information service providers can bring alongside with faster payments, you might find that there is different propositions that can be deployed. So whilst we're not necessarily, you know, doing the thinking around what the proposition is, we want to hear from you as to what can we be doing more to support you in delivering those propositions. What do you, you know, what are your needs now that potentially can be delivered today or can be delivered when the NPA comes along? And so more of that dialogue, and us being part of that dialogue, I think is really important. And we're actually inviting that dialogue. That would be my message.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Maha. So this one's for you, Galina, and I think this is a fundamental question. And I've been in the payments industry for far too long, and every time I've done any form of research into why customers would use one payment type versus another, I get a similar response. So really like to hear from you about, do consumers really care how they make their payments, what vehicle they use to pay? Do they just really want the payment to be made?
I think consumers don't think about channels. The research that we have is they're more concerned about whether they have the funds to make the payment rather than necessarily being hugely informed about the actual channel that they use. We're inside the payments bubble, so we think about you know, credit or VocaLink or whatever. Most people just say, it's in my pocket, and now is it cash or is it a card or whatever. I think consumer bodies and consumer representatives do think and care about payment channels. And I'm just conscious of time, and hopefully we can get to questions from the public in a second. But the key issue, I think, is each of the payment channels and payment types has a different range of protections. It's confusing for regulatory specialists, and it's truly confusing for consumers. And often they don't know what the issue is until it's too late and they're in trouble. So I think the issue now is, as highlighted by the Pay.UK report, we need data. So we really need data on the payment landscape as a whole, on the cost of protections for each of these channels. Obviously, this data is going to be commercial and confident. So I would ask the PSR, as part of its forward program of work, to perhaps undertake a schedule or a schedule of work to really iron out what the cost of protection is by channel, so that we can understand what an appropriate baseline of consumer protection would be across the payments landscape as a whole. I think in that way, then we can have an informed debate about innovation to spark competition that consumers will actually want to take up. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Galina, and good challenge to Genevieve. I'm sure he'll take that forward. So just one last question, and then we'll move on to closing remarks and then questions from the audience. So this one's for Charlotte, and this is about the merchant relationship. And what do you think needs to change to get more merchants uptaking this type of payment? I know that Amex has a number of merchants that you have contracted with through your open banking proposition. But what do you think needs to change from a merchant perspective?
So, I think merchants are interested in giving choice, right? And in choice in payments to consumers. I think that they like anything that can give them lower abandonment rates, because and things like what we're talking about from the faster payments can make a difference because there's less friction for the consumer. I think that they like payment methods and things that they need to think about is about whether they're holding that sensitive payment information. And Galina talked about the PCI DSS, right? Like, and the responsibility around that. I think they like payments that they can receive instantly, and they like them to be competitive, right? So price plays a role. And I think as we're talking about with PISPs, I think can really play into all of this. What I think merchants need, and it is early days, so I think there just needs to be, my first priority would be the completion of the open banking roadmap. So refunds, I think, are a core functionality to give merchants confidence because they don't want the complexity of taking payment on one method and then if they need to refund on another. And then I also think merchants are going to really benefit when premium APIs are incentivized and we see more of them. I think that's going to drive the change.
Okay, great. So thanks very much for all of your comments. It's been a really interesting debate so far, and I'm sure we'll have some great questions from the audience. Just as a closing remark from me, rather than prolong time, I would like to hear what the audience are going to ask us. I'd just like to say it's so interesting to hear all of the different angles and different take-ups from the point of view of what's important, but actually there are some real common threads. I think, you know, consumer choice, consumer protection, the ability for refunds to be made. I think, Charlotte, you've made your point well, and I think that has to be part of the roadmap to make sure that that part of the journey can be fulfilled. So there's a number of steps to make the journeys better and to make the uptake of retail faster payments within a retail environment really take off. But I think we're on the journey, and that's the exciting part. We've got some of the stepping stones in place and we know what we have to do. So thanks very much for your interesting debate today, and let's move to questions. Hi everyone. So we've started to get some great questions coming through. So we've only got 5 minutes, so let's get right into the questions. So the first one we've got, and this is for Genevieve. Genevieve, can you give any insight on when the next new market review will be?
Good question. The short answer is no, I can't. However, I can let you know that we're using a number of our other regulatory tools like consultation papers, calls for views, a whole bunch of stuff on our website that are coming up imminently. So do keep an eye on that. But in terms of market reviews, no announcements at this stage. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Genevieve. And the next question's for Charlotte. So in your opinion, when it comes to open banking, where do you see the opportunities or the threats for American Express?
Thanks, Kate. I mainly see opportunities, right? I think, as I said earlier, it really gives us an opportunity to compete with debit. I think it's really great to see the innovation. I think it gives us access to new consumers and merchants. So I see real upside on this. And in terms of threats, I don't really see a threat. I just see change. And that changing environment is a positive thing for driving innovation. And it's just one that American Express want to capitalize on.
Okay, thanks. And American Express are obviously a very innovative company, so we see that happening as you progress with your proposition through open banking.
Good.
Okay, so next question. We touched on consumer protection throughout the actual session itself. And the reason that was important is that's one of the more obvious areas that could be a potential barrier to uptake of the use of faster payments in a retail environment. Good to get your thoughts, Galina. I know you talked a bit about consumer protection and what that means through the eyes of a consumer, but can we expand on that a little bit, on what you think the impacts are?
Sure. The protections available to consumers vary hugely across the payments landscape. I mean, this was summarised most recently by the Pay.UK report on consumer protections. So going from the high of Section 75 on credit cards through chargeback for credit and debit cards, and then to scheme-specific scheme-specific or company-specific protections depending on the open banking entity involved. So I think what we need here is to simplify things for the consumer and to provide an appropriate base level of protection, because I don't believe that we're there yet, and consumer organizations also don't believe that we're at that level yet. So to do this, we will need data, and data across the whole payments landscape in terms of what it costs to deliver these varying types of consumer protections. And then we can figure out what the appropriate base level of protection would be across the payment landscape, but also including for FPS and open banking.
Okay, thank you very much, Galina. That's great. So one last question, and then it's time for us to wrap up. So this is for Maha, and this is all around collaboration. It would be really good to hear from you as part of Pay.UK about what Pay.UK wants the market to do, how we want them to behave, and how we can play a part in collaboration to make new propositions happen in this space.
I think great question to actually end on, because you know, when it comes to the payments, all the payments landscape and all those who participate in the payments chain, the one thing that characterizes kind of really successful delivery of whether it's proposition or other types of services that are needed, it's collaboration. I think the need for us to work together on certain important parts of making the payments chain work requires collaboration, and things around fraud, anti-fraud measures, consumer protection, how can we make sure that there's interoperability. These are all things that can really be conducive to collaboration, and I hope that we continue to collaborate across the industry where it makes sense.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Maha. And I wanted to say thank you very much to the panel. It's been a really interesting debate. So thanks, Genevieve, Charlotte, Galina, and Maha, and we'll close at that point.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.